Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see you here on our monthly Clarity First webinar. I'm excited about today's topic, a multiplication conversation. My name is Brian Rose. I'm Auxano's Chief Engagement Officer and a Senior Lead Navigator on the team. I get to host these webinars, and today, two very special guests that are really today's more of a conversation. I'm excited about it because I think as we all serve in some capacity of church leadership, we understand that the future is now. In some ways, we just had a discussion about some AI technology, but then we also know that there's some things we can do to be prepared for that, especially in this realm of multiplication. So I'm excited to have on the webinar with me today, David Putman, who's another Senior Lead Navigator at Auxano. He's a founder of Planting the Gospel. He was a former XP missional strategist in the local church and for many years, and now serves full-time on the Auxano team. Also, Todd Wilson is with us today. Todd's a serial kingdom entrepreneur. Serial, I added that in there, Todd. I hope that's okay. Just a multiplication engineer, co-founder of Exponential and more than a dozen other church multiplication organizations. I did a little quick research. Between the two of them, there's about 16 books on advancing the church, advancing the kingdom in your personal life, multiplication, some of those things. And so it's a pretty exciting conversation to have these two guys on here. Welcome, David. Welcome, Todd. How's everybody doing today?
Yeah, Brian, it's good to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Getting to connect with Todd. One of my favorite things is these days is working very closely with him. And so, hey, we've got a lot to share today, so we're eager to jump in.
Back it up real quick, David, or Todd, why don't you answer this? How did you guys meet? How did you guys connect? Your paths overlapped, and what was this overlapping passion that brought this relationship together?
You know, we're both old enough at this point that it'll be interesting to see if we have the same memory of when we first met. I seem to remember, but you're going to have to correct me, David. David used to be at Mountain Lake Church and helping run churchplanters.com. And I believe that was the first time that we met. I think maybe in a little bit of a pushy way was really wanting a bunch of Exponential flyers handed out on every seat in the churchplanters.com venue. And David very graciously followed me around, helping me put things out on every seat.
Yeah, well, actually, I was following you around, making sure you weren't putting the wrong things on the seats. Yeah, very similar. You know, what I remember about our first connection or early connections, and that was a great reminder, was around our conferences. Todd had Exponential, we had churchplanters.com. And Todd, if I remember correctly, we were in early days, like first years.
Right.
And I don't know if you remember this or not, but Sean Lovejoy, who was my senior pastor at the time, and I co-founded Church Planters, and we came to maybe the first Exponential to really promote our conference and what we were trying to do in coaching church planters. And I had also just released with Ed Stetzer a book called Breaking the Missional Code. And for some reason, Ed, imagine this, Ed was the keynote and I wasn't. And I'm still bitter about it, but I'll get over it.
Tell it all.
I'm kidding. But Ed was set to speak. He was one of the keynotes with a couple of other guys, and Ed wasn't there. He was running late, notoriously. And you came sort of frantically up in the hall and said, "Are you ready? Are you ready? Ed's not here. You're going to have to go." And then Ed comes in. I'm just looking at you like, man, I'm not going anywhere. You better.
I love this shared history. That's you know, right now it's about 20 years old, right? It's about 20 years of shared history of church planting, church multiplication, a heart for local church. So we can look back and see that, you know, the two of you guys have had a lot to do in shaping these conversations. My question is, what are you up to these days? You know, what's going on today? And then, you know, as we transition this conversation today, we're going to look to the future, but what's going on right now? What are you guys working on right now together?
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, man. So yeah, interesting what 18 months, 2 years ago, let's say, about 2 years ago, the Lord brought us back together through our relationship with Foxano. As Foxano, Jim, Brian, a bunch of us entered into some really serious conversations with Exponential, and the shared problem we wanted to solve was, hey, how do we move churches from addition to reproduction and multiplication? How do we move that 16% need number up, or that 7% number up to 16% and beyond, in terms of
rewind, David. What are you talking about? Those numbers? Give us, for those
Yeah.
who don't have
well,
context for
Todd, why
that.
don't you jump in there, because that's really
Yeah.
part of the vision that drives you so much.
Right. Yeah. We've done a couple of national studies that we look at churches in the realm of subtraction, plateau, and addition. Every church is somewhere in the spectrum of the bell curve of subtraction, addition, and plateau. And we've done 2 national studies that show about 35% of churches are in subtraction mode, about 35% of churches are plateaued. So about 70% of churches plateaued or declining. And then about 30% of churches in the addition orientation. I'm guessing it's been that way for 2,000 years. I don't think there's anything unique to that bell curve right now. It's the bell curve of life. The part that I wake up burdened by every day is that out of that 100% that are somewhere in the subtraction, plateau, and addition realm, less than 7% ever reproduce. And if you just let that sink in, that less than 7% reproduce, we could not sustain our population if less than 7% of people reproduced. And so when we're not seeing movements in the West, it starts with this idea that we are not valuing reproduction on the scorecard. So where the 16% comes from is this simple. Sociologists will commonly tell you that you've got to get at least 16% of a population behaving a certain way for it to become normative. If I could get everyone on this Zoom call speaking in duck language, quacking, so if 16% of you will start quacking to communicate, sociologists would say then eventually the rest of you will come along and quack to communicate. So the 16% mission that I think drives a lot of us is this idea of what does it take to see reproduction, healthy church reproduction. And we need to come back later and talk about healthy, because most reproduction is not healthy.
Yeah, I was going to say there's 2 words there: healthy and reproduction. Like, how do you define reproduction? First of all, if we're saying that only 70 or less than 7% ever reproduce, is that just church planting? Is that multi-site? I mean, it's such a broad conversation, Todd. How are you guys categorizing that?
And we need about 4 webinars to go into all those dimensions. We can do a whole webinar on is multi-site even reproduction or not?
Right.
Mathematically, it's simply a form of addition. It's not even reproduction mathematically.
Yeah.
And so this idea of less than 7% of churches are reproducing, but how, if we could get to the 16% number, then all of a sudden a normative measure of success in the church, moving beyond, dollars and bodies and seats and the normal metrics, if we could actually get churches reproducing so that it becomes a normative measure of success in the church. And I'm just as excited as I can be that the team at Exanos just really jumped in to that conversation the last couple of years, wanting to really help pave the way for, churches that aren't reproducing to start reproducing.
Yeah, that's really David's heart too, as a senior lead navigator on our team. I love the fact that, all of us bring different passions to the table, and that's David's passion, in that multiplication, reproduction conversation. And so for you guys as leaders in this movement over the last, 20 years, let's talk about what's changed. Let's talk about what's changed in this last couple of decades, especially maybe even the last 3 years. What are you seeing that's different today than maybe when Exponential was founded or when churchplanners.com was founded? What's new about this, or what's renewed within that multiplication reproduction conversation?
Yeah,
Let's go, David. I'll start with you.
Yeah, and I want to back up for a minute, because Todd says something really important I don't want us to pass over. And he said, if only 7% of the population reproduced, then we could not sustain the human race. And what we know, what all of us know, is that we've seen a decline of over like 20%. Gallup's numbers from 70 to about 49 pre-COVID, that people who identified in the US with some kind of worshiping body. And so the reality is we're not sustaining. We just have to go ahead and admit, and a lot of the reasons that we're in decline is because we're not reproducing. Because local churches do not last forever, nor should they. They have a life cycle. And so part of that life cycle is reproduction. And so you can't even be you're not considered a healthy adult if you can't reproduce. Something's wrong. And as a church, we're really not, going back to health, we're really not a healthy church if we can't reproduce. And so, that's what we're able to partner with, is coming together, putting together some Oxano style process tools with incredible wealth of resources that Exponential has been curating over the last 20 years, and coming up with a simple process that will expedite church planting, where everyone on here, and I mean everyone, there is not anyone on here that couldn't lead a reproducing movement from one perspective or the other. So anyway, just sort of tying up that last piece, I think, hey, we've seen a lot of changes over the last 20 years when it comes to church planting and where we are today. And for example, one of the really key changes that we're seeing right now is really sort of the shift from churches, and this is what we're pushing for, churches that are and church planting that's driven by programs. And especially when I say programs, I think what has really driven church planting for the last 20 years that has become sort of normative is this sort of launch idea. And that we're going to go out and we're going to launch churches, and we've been pretty effective at developing skills around launching, but now there seems to be this pendulum swinging, and we're seeing churches move from sort of this programmatic perspective of launching to, hey, what does it look like to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples, multiple generations of disciple making that ultimately launch churches or plant churches that plant churches that plant churches. I mean, to me, I think what we're hearing, sort of a groundswell of energy and activity and whispers, is sort of this global South way of disciple making movements beginning to shift and come to rest right in our own context. And one of the things that I like to say when it comes to this is that your church can be a disciple-making movement right where you're at. And every person in your church can be a part of catalyzing a movement right where they live, work, study, play. Anyway, so that's one of the big things I see.
And Brian, I think on this first one of disciple making, I mean, David's giving us a little bit of the inspirational possibility of what could be and how things are transitioning. I think I'll let the engineer in me come out for a second. So the disciple making to the first, second, third generation broadly kind of thing. I want to link it to the programmatic engine of the church for a second. If we took the 320,000 churches in America right now, and we took the paid staff on those 320,000 churches, and somehow we did an exercise where we said, if you are unable to draw on a piece of paper the 3 generations of disciple making by name of people that you've done in your life, you're no longer in full-time paid vocational ministry. You just got to let that sink in, okay? We don't have many paid vocational ministers left in the 320,000 churches. very little of our growth in the 320,000 churches. And when I say very little, I'm going to go out on a limb and say less than 1% of it is through disciple making. The elephant in the room the last 30 years is we grow by adding programmatically. And I think if we look at how the conversation, what David's giving us the optimistic side of it, that you've got a convergence happening of, I'll just call out the older boomers are discontented with, man, have I building this ladder against the wrong wall? And a lot of it's rooted in this programmatic versus disciple making piece. And you've got an entire next generation rising up that doesn't want anything to do with the buildings and the seats and I shouldn't say anything to do with.
Yeah.
Once they start having kids and a family, they're going to have a whole lot more that they like about the programmatic model.
They certainly don't value it as highly, right?
They don't value it as highly.
Yeah.
And so, I'm excited. I mean, your question, what's changing in the conversation? When I got into ministry 22 years ago, out of the marketplace, all I could do was go look at what Saddleback was doing and what Willow Creek was doing. And what was I trying to figure out? The silver bullet for how you programmatically grow.
Yeah.
I honestly don't even remember in my first 5 years of ministry conversations about disciple making. So that it is really, that's one of the first things that's significantly changing in, at least for me, in the last 20 years.
Yeah. Don't be so negative, Todd.
Well, that's why we're good together. You can be the inspiration and I'll be the reality of
that's what I love about you.
Yeah.
Hey, just put a little flesh on what you said. My daughter, who is a younger millennial, came to me the other day and announced, she says, "Hey, I'm starting Ball Church." And she's a disciple maker. And I said, "That's awesome." "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, there's a group of us that are in travel ball and we're missing church. And so I'm initiating a disciple." And by the way, then she goes and starts talking about her ball church, and it's all disciple making.
Yeah.
And, and she didn't blink, so us older boomers, while we're back criticizing people who are engaged in life outside of our church, and we've got someone like her out there, we just got to flip that script somewhat and realize, hey, we've got the potential of church happening all over the place if we can begin to rethink a little bit.
It feels like it is, this idea that, hey, listen, you can sit and criticize these other things, or you can go and reach through discipleship in those areas to do that. Maybe an unreached people group on travel ball teams and, theater groups, some of those things, right?
Hey, there's a world of opportunity out here.
Yeah.
But it is literally a part of the going impulse that allows us to enter into that world,
Yeah.
And so I think another shift that we're seeing, and love to hear Todd talk about this a little bit, but it's just this idea of mega to multi to micro. And so that's been a real shift that we've been watching, even participating in. And Todd, love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I think you're right on that, David. I mean, if you go back, what we would currently call the church growth movement, which, we won't go into all the details of that, but 35 to 40 years old, if you can go back 40 years, there's less than 100 churches in America over 2,000 in size. That's 40 years ago. 20 years ago, right around 2001, when Leadership Network was convening the first, think tank for multi-site, you've got less than 100 multi-site churches in America 22 years ago. So we go in 20 years from less than 100 mega churches to thousands. And then in 20 years, we go from less than 100 multi-site churches to thousands. Both of those are exponential curves of, wow, up and to the right. I think we're probably seeing a whole lot now in the multi part of elder boards around the country are sitting around having conversations. Now, why are we doing this? How are we going to really do succession here? And I think we're going to see a whole lot of succession plans, which are decentralizing that, or taking apart the empires we're building and what we're doing. But in the middle of that, I think you go from mega to multi to micro. I mean, I know for David and I, just about everywhere we go now, the conversations are around micro churches, micro networks, his daughter's example. It's a micro expression of, and now's when we get into all the arguments. It's a micro expression of what? Of church, of a mission field, of a missionary in a mission field. But if we can rally around and link it back to this idea of disciple making, no matter what label you put on it, it's in the micro setting, a disciple making catalyst in a micro setting. So I think this convergence of a discontent with programmatic approach to growth and an instinctive, we need to be disciple making, converges with the same trend that's happening from mega to multi to micro, that it's a natural sort of setting for the conversation.
Yeah, and we see those movements that have come, even how church planners have been trained, even kind of how we think about what our you talked about the programmatic engine versus a disciple making engine, some of those things. I know some questions have come up in the chat, and someone wanted to define disciple making. I was like, hey, listen, that's pretty well defined in writings, and some of these, both these guys. I mean, David, you want the definition of disciple making? It's over David's left shoulder right now. So there's some of those things, like, we can see those movements happening around us. I love the history part of it. I love seeing what's changed. I kind of want to transition the conversation, if that's okay with you guys, to the future. Like, what are you most excited about right now today in this idea of multiplying churches? And we've a little bit used multiplication, reproduction synonymously. Is that fair? Or do we need to delineate between what is truly church multiplication versus reproducing, churches?
Yeah. I think if it's okay, Brian, just to transition from history to now the present, you brought up a couple of things I think are worth mentioning, just to kind of leave behind the history part of it. I think we shouldn't miss the fact that I think it was about 18 years ago, Ed Stetzer was working with Outreach Magazine to put the first ever in Outreach list of the top 20 reproducing churches.
Right.
And our team at Exponential helped with that. And we spent about 6 months literally trying to come up with 20 reproducing churches in the United States. And the good news is we did. Yeah. The bad news is that by the time you got down to numbers 18, 19, and 20, it's great that we found them, but I'm not sure it was anything to write home about, kind of thing. It was hard to find 20 reproducing churches in the United States. Today, no problem at all. The conversation is definitely shifting, and people are valuing the reproduction piece more. You also mentioned education. I'll just bring that up really quickly, that similarly, when we were doing that list about 18 years ago, we got a list of about 400 Bible colleges and seminaries in the United States to take a look at what's happening with church planting in the Bible colleges and seminaries. And it was a very, very, you wouldn't find a DMin program in multiplication or a MDiv in multiplication or anything. Today, you've got, it's lots of different options. Just the educational side of it too is ramping up. Bob Logan said to me at one point years ago that for his generation, when they were planting, church planting was not an industry. You had to figure it out on your own. And now today whether that's good or bad, it's an industry. You can get just about anything that you need in it. So I think those are some of the trends that shape today. And then your question in the transition to the future, You're asking, do we need to make a distinction between reproduction and multiplication?
Well, maybe just what are those core criteria when you looked at those lists, today, we don't, again, that's probably another webinar in and of itself, like what constitutes a reproducing church. But when you guys are making that list, can you give us just a real brief, here are the top 3 core criteria,
Yep. So there is an online assessment tool for churches to take to figure out where they are reproducing. We'll have to get the exact thing out. I think it's reproducingchurches.org or something. We can look up the website, and it will give you a score on whether you're a reproducing church or not. What we assumed when we were trying to put together some criteria for measuring, it is important to start with mathematically, reproduction is different than multiplication. We use the word multiplication way too loosely in our church context. Multiplication is healthy reproduction broadly, multiple generations into the future. None of us right now can decide we're going to multiply. Let's just talk physically. We can't decide we're going to multiply. And here's the proof. Most of our great grandkids, 3 generations into the future, are not even going to know our names. If you think you can actually control the reproduction of your great grandkids, then we need to go into business together, because I want to figure that out with you, kind of thing. All we can do is decide to do healthy reproduction or reproduction in our generation, and hope that it rubs off on the next generation, who rubs on the next generation. When Adam and Noah were commanded to be fruitful and multiply, if we got to look under the hood at what multiply means there. It didn't mean for Adam and Noah to be the father of millions and millions of people with their wives. It meant the small family unit. It meant reproduce, broadly, multiple generations in the future. If you do a multiplication chain, just starting with reproduction, 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 become 8, just plot out. That's that chain, a little bit like behind David's head in the picture, a multiplication chain. Where we get the multiplication curve is reproduction, multiple generations. So we made the assumption that multiplication would be an outcome, not something you could measure directly in an individual church. The reality is, where you see multiplication in church in the world, it is through a family of churches, not through one church.
Very good.
It's a family of churches. So when we went to try to, go ahead, David, I don't want to hog the time here.
No, I was just, you're right on. And so what becomes key, and what we're seeing, I'm thinking about the whole conversation when Exponential did their original research looking into these percentages. What'd you find, like, Todd? 0% that were multiplying?
0% multiplying. Yeah.
So again, multiplying being, reproducing to 4 generations and beyond.
Yeah.
And so, but now the thing that encourages me, and Todd and I have had some really deep conversations, because I feel like we're just learning and figuring this thing out as we go, is that this idea that he mentioned, a family of churches, is critical to it. It's breakthrough thinking when it comes to level 5 church planting. And so what is happening, and what we begin to see, is that there are churches now that are planting churches through reproduction, through adding. But what they're also doing is they're embedding a culture of reproduction, where these churches, now their children are reproducing because they value family, and then as they also plant and produce that same culture, but it's even more beyond culture. Sometimes it's systems, whatever it might be. Now we're beginning to see churches, these families of churches that are making up level 5 multiplication. So I think that's just critical. And Todd is attending one of those now in the Raleigh area.
I think it's just to highlight, when we did the two national studies, it was two separate national studies that found the same thing, one with Lifeway and one with an independent company from them. Both of those studies found that about 75% of church plants were not turning around and being involved in planting after they were planted. So you got to let that sink in. So 75% of church plants don't turn around and plant again. But if the definition of multiplication is reproduction 3 generations into the future broadly, by only having 1 of 4 church plants turn around and participate in church planting, we cut off the ability for multiplication to happen.
Right.
So this idea David's talking about, that we have to embed the DNA of reproduction into the churches, it's critical. But now let's link it back to the disciple making piece. This is where David's just going to keep saying I'm a negative guy here, but I'm optimistic. Let's get to the optimistic stuff and all this. But here's the deal. We are programmatically growing our churches. And in most cases, we're programmatically reproducing our churches. We're not organically reproducing. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing. The church that I'm my home church in DC, we've been involved in 300 and some church plants programmatically. You can put money and energy and time in. And unfortunately, if the lead pastor and myself at my home church died today, maybe we wouldn't be planting churches in the next couple of years because we're programmatically doing it. But here's the problem. Whether it's programmatic addition and disciple making or programmatic church planting, never in the history of the world has a program reproduced itself. Programs only consume. So we've set up an operating system to consume in our growth that's not actually capable of reproducing. So we've got to, there's a challenge there that David's on exactly the right path. We've got to embed a culture of the reproduction part that's rooted in the right kind of addition, the disciple making kind of addition that can reproduce. Disciples who make disciples who plant churches that plant churches. Right now, we have programs that consume volunteers to generate programs that aren't capable of reproducing churches.
And so it seems like that, in some of what you guys are working on right now too, it's not just the DNA of programmatic reproduction, but it's also the definition or the attributes of what a disciple is in that particular church, so that can be reproduced, so that there can be something that is handed off person to person, or this discipleship that, as you said, Todd, most of us haven't experienced, or most of the paid vocational ministry leaders aren't actually doing. To do that. Is that what you guys are working on right now? Is that the optimism you have of saying, hey, listen, yes, we can see the engineering of the programmatic reproduction of churches, but we're also helping define the personality, the personal reproduction of a disciple.
Yeah. And let me just clarify, to not sound completely negative on the programmatic thing. We are way better off having lots of churches programmatically reproducing, because there'll be way more people in eternity because of that than we are not having the reproduction. Right. So what I get energized on working with David on is his commitment to, via what you guys are doing at Oxano, we need to move as many churches as we can into the reproduction ecosystem, whether it's programmatic or not. We need churches moving in to there. And guess what? Even programmatic churches that are reproducing, if they're doing it the way David's talking, that they embed a DNA of church planting is important and they pass it on and they're doing it broadly, you still can get to programmatic multiplication, which we've got to keep remembering. That lost people being found ends up with more people in eternity. So aren't we better off doing something programmatically than not doing it at all? It's just what we're excited about is let's turn the gain up on both. Let's help churches move from their programmatic orientation without reproduction to be reproducing. But let's also be working on operating systems and approaches that are going to put disciple making as the core engine of the church so they can reproduce more organically.
Yeah. And I think just to jump in here, just one of the stats that really haunt me is Discipleship Oregon Exponential came together to look at churches and their disciple making patterns and found that only less than 5% of churches knew how to make disciples the Jesus way. And so, we're a long way. I mean, we can start churches programmatically all day long, but if all we're doing is raising up, Brian, you mentioned types of disciples. If all we're doing is people who volunteer for the institution and attend a service and yada, 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 how give an offering, are we really moving the needle on lostness, on gospel saturation? And so, one of the things that we're really working desperately is to see disciple making become the core engine of the church, to replace the programming element of the prevailing church.
How are you guys engineering that right now? How are you guys working on that right now?
Well, and we'll get to that. Let me just say,
I'm excited to hear kind of, I'm kind of feeling a little the tension of tell me more about this kind of a thing.
Yeah, no, that's all. And like Todd said, that's almost 3 more webinars here. Yeah. But here's the key, is, obviously, if the people who lead churches don't know how to make disciples the Jesus way, we got to go way back.
Yeah.
Like the work that we're doing is not a big systems work. Often the work we're doing is, we're addressing paradigms, we're addressing practices, we're practicing real disciple making. We're helping churches transition culture. There's a whole list of things, but it really has to go back down to the individual at some point that I've got to ask the question, am I a disciple maker and do I know how to make disciples? But here's another part of that. And it's not even make disciples. Like I would argue, and I think Todd would too, that churches are making disciples. Everyone on here who leads or participate in a church, you're making disciples in one way or the other. But the thing that everything that we're talking about turns on is, are we making disciple makers? So are we making disciple makers who make disciples, who in return make other disciples who become disciple makers? Now, so someone asks, what is a disciple? What is a disciple? What does it mean to make disciples? And it's really, I've just sort of pulled up Discipleship Org's definition because they do it well. And disciple making is simply entering into relationship to help people trust and follow Jesus. And so that's the core of what we've got to get back to as the church. And even in reproduction and multiplication, what I'm learning personally, because during COVID, we really began to go aggressively after disciple making through a microgroup strategy in our fitness community. And now we have over 50 families in disciple making in our fitness community, more than most churches, by the way. I'm not talking about attending classes. I'm talking about disciples who are making disciples who are making disciples. We're beginning to see some community transformation. It's amazing. But when we did this, we had no intention, absolutely no intention of planting churches. We just said we have a need, and our need is to make disciples. But what happened was we began to see a church form around us, And so the way I like to describe it is is we have a bunch of disciples. Now we're, as a steward of God's kingdom, we're having to go back and ask the question, what does it mean to be a family of disciples or a family of churches, Todd, as we would say, that are making disciples and are multiplying churches. So the question is, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Well, the chicken comes first. Or maybe you would say the egg comes first, but the point is disciple making has to come first. And I think a lot of times, and now I'm preaching, is we've made a bit of an idol out of our church planting and our church growth stuff. As Mike Breen would say, the demise of the North American church, said it years ago, was competition, rock star pastors, and consumerism. And I think our competitiveness and our need to be platform has created something. And so we got to be careful, because even our best efforts can become guilty of adultery.
So
and so it's that, and even, like I have to be reminded of that with disciple making, because it really, if you want to boil it on down, it gets down to lordship of Christ. We disciple people personally. Where we begin discipling is lordship of Jesus Christ. And by the way, we disciple outside of the church. We disciple towards lordship. And as people make Jesus Lord of their lives, guess what? They're coming to know him as Savior. And so I think you got to go all the way back to that early DNA of the Christian movement. And you're going to find it in the activity and the life that Jesus lived and called us to emulate.
Hey, Brian, just to try to get where you were wanting to go,
Yeah. No, I love that. I think this is great.
Let me go at, if I'm trying to characterize what have David and I together been working on for a couple of years. Here's how I would make it concrete for people. The entry point to it, a few years ago, we got a group of about 20 leaders together from networks, denominations, reproducing churches, to just look at this question of what do we need to be doing to change this scorecard. And the first problem we ran into is that, we're kind of having to look overseas a little bit compared to here, because we're not seeing it. And that immediately leads to does that apply here from there? But we were able, with this team for about a year and a half, to come up with, observation wise and behavior, about 15 different characteristics of healthy reproducing families of churches. Well, 15 is too many for any of us to get our head around, to boil down. So that team boiled the 15 down into we call it 3 dimensions of multiplication: disciple making at the core, mobilization on personal calling, and then capacity building to do the other 2 things. Was as simple as it boiled down to. So if I'm talking, what are we doing practically right now?
Yeah,
I'm thrilled to death. You guys have jumped in at Oxano, really consumed those 3 dimensions, looking at things, and have put together for existing churches. I'm going to use my words now, and you guys can fix the words, but just like out there's leadership pipelines and discipleship pipelines, and you can go get into a cohort of any kind of pipeline you want in the church at this point. But you guys are putting together, through a thing called Multiplier's Journey, a pipeline experience for churches, existing churches, to say, how do we, number one, move from not reproducing to be reproducing? And number 2, how do we turn up the gain on the reproduction? Because what I mean by turn up the gain is, so you reproduce one time in the life of your church, you're not multiplying. But if you really want to get in a multiplier's journey to multiplying as an existing church, you've got to do it over and over and over. And eventually you've got multiplication. So I would say the first concrete thing, and David, you jump in on this one, but is a thing, multiplier's journey, and you're calling the pipeline a multiplier's collab for existing churches to jump in and start getting really practical, instead of just talking about disciple making or the parts. How do we put a plan for doing it together? The The second big thing going on that you guys are also involved in is we're calling it the church multiplication operating system. Right now, this elephant in the room with what we're calling the programmatic growth engine, the last 30 to 35 years, the operating system that shapes most of our models in the church right now are a consumer-driven, the purpose-driven operating system. Saddleback Sam and Sally, 2.5 kids, $150,000 salary. What do they need to consume for us to capture them? And we've got a consumer-driven operating system that's giving us what we've got. If we want to change the future, we've got to go change the operating system. So the second thing that's going on is we spent a year, 40 plus networks and denominations, you guys helping co-lead it, with what does the operating system look like with disciple making at the core, mobilization on people's calling as the mechanism for getting out there to make disciples, and then healthy capacity building and scaling of the infrastructure of the church to enable the disciple making and mobilization. And that initiative has now just kicked off with the first 15 pilot church plants using the new operating system. So as an example, David's one of the sponsors of a planter using the new operating system with a disciple making core in it. So we've got two parallel paths, Brian. There for existing churches, there's a pipeline that you guys have put together with a couple of years worth of work.
Yeah.
And there's a pipeline for church planners to get in who say, I don't want to use the old operating system. I want to start from the beginning with a multiplication operating system, disciple making at the core. And obviously, and I'll let David go back, but Jesus spent 3 years with 12. So a little bit of the elephant in the room on this definition of disciple making. I'm going to throw something out there that I don't actually know the answer to, but there's a reason that Jesus didn't come for 3 years and fill up large auditoriums with 5,000 people or more every year for the 3 years. He could have done that. There were multi-thousand seat auditoriums within his ministry range. He could have every week just preached to the crowds and been done, but he chose not to. There was something about 3 years of relational coming alongside and doing it. So is it by coincidence that the conversation is converging from mega to multi to micro, and the next generation is wanting this relational expression, and the conversation's moving to disciple making as the deal? Here's where it gets painful, though, is it's really hard to financially support a staff of full-time paid people when you're making 12 disciples in 3 years. So the elephant in the room in all of this is follow the money. Follow the money. And that's why we need two parallel paths. We've got to go optimize what's happening. Let's not go blow up existing churches. Let's go optimize what's happening. But we better get our act together and start planting churches on a different operating system than the one we're using right now. And so both of those paths are happening.
Yeah. And I would just add, that we would love to have conversations with you if you're trying to figure out reproduction. One of the sort of takeaways from this conversation is, hey, just just reach out to us. We'll send you some information and schedule a Zoom call one-on-one. I'd love to hear about your context, tell you about the MJ journey and how you can be involved. So just practically speaking, I won't go through it today, but I'm willing to do that one-on-one with you and send you information on it. So make sure you do that.
David, I dropped your email into the chat right now.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's happening. Hey, we kind of dangled a carrot out in promoting this of what are some roadblocks to doing this. I love the idea, and Todd, we would probably fine tune the word pipeline with the word process as an organization by Oxana. We're process consultants. We're not product consultants. And so that's why we love this partnership. And that's why we jumped in, is because we think in terms of process, both for existing churches to gain a multiplication understanding, and for new churches to embed that multiplication beginning. There's process involved in doing that. What do you guys see as kind of the big, as we kind of come down to the last part of the time we have allotted today? What are some of those pitfalls? What are some of the things that as leaders in the local church or leaders alongside the local church, we need to be looking for as warning signs or potential roadblocks or pitfalls for this future?
So I'll jump in here. I think we've said a lot of it, but I'll just sort of recap. One is failure to install a disciple-making engine.
Okay.
So I think we've
continuing the programmatic way of thinking.
Yes, we've got to get back to disciple making, and most of us are going to have to learn what that looks like.
And real quick before you go on, David, if you don't mind, and linked to that is the fuel of programs as an engine is volunteerism. The U.S. church is the largest mobilizer of volunteers in the history of the world. Every week, the number of volunteer hours in a church, and that is to feed and fuel the programs that we're growing on. So as soon as we do what David just said, which is shift to a disciple-making engine, we've got to also shift the focus of volunteers to mobilization to the mission fields where they work, live, and play, seeing themselves not as volunteers, but as disciple makers who are mobilized into the cracks and crannies of society to do the very thing we're talking about, make the disciples, as opposed to be the volunteers to fuel things. Sorry to cut that off, David, but I think we can't miss going hand in hand with the disciple making is we've got to shift our focus from volunteerism to mobilization.
Yeah. So the second one I mentioned earlier, but failure to understand Jesus' style of disciple making. Listen, somebody in the chat, and I appreciate you putting it there. I'm trying to keep up with what you're saying. Talked about, how do we keep from programming it and disciple making, et cetera. And the reality is everyone's talking disciple making now. Everybody's talking discipleship. It's an aspect of discipleship, but it's not discipleship the Jesus way oftentimes, because I keep up with it. I've studied most of them. And so I really think we've got to get back. And I say get back, I think most of us have never, listen, I've been around a long time. No one ever discipled me the Jesus way. And I don't think I'm alone on this call. And so, the big thing that distinguishes it is we do a lot of knowledge base in our churches that fuels our programs, and we got to get back to obedient based discipleship. Again, it gets back to the core issue of lordship. Jesus is Lord. And so I think failure to understand that we're not just, when we say disciple making or discipleship, we got to go back to the meaning of those words. So I think that's really key. Number 3 is failure to, and by the way, you'll see what I care about in all this, failure to move outside of our churches in disciple making. And so, I see this is a big time deal, even with some of the micro church and micro stuff and really good obedient based stuff that I'm seeing. It's not in the context of mobilization.
What is that context, David?
Well, we made a program out of it. We do it in our churches with one another until everybody in our churches have gone through and become a part of a micro group or certain kind of group. But we're not doing anything to move the needle on our mission by making disciples who are returning to make disciples. That basically becomes our evangelism strategy for reaching our world with the gospel. And so I think that's a real danger, is that we'll start doing it and feel good about what we're doing, but we're really not doing anything different. We just put on a different dress that day.
We've just reskinned a program with disciple-making language.
Absolutely. And so this is really key. And then the last one, I think, is just the failure to grasp the power of multiplication. And what I mean by that is Mark 4, real quick. Parable of the sower, it, some seed fell on good soil and it grew 30, 60, 100-fold. I know Todd has a vision for and a commitment to work with people who are going to multiply 100 times, organizations, networks. I'm the same way. And when I read this, there was a verse that really stood out to me as I read through the scriptures. And when Jesus finished it, he says, "Then said Jesus to them, don't you understand this parable? How will you understand any parable?" Now think about that for a moment. In other words, he's unlocking one of the principles of the kingdom, which is multiplication. And he stops in the middle right before he interprets it. And he says, do you hear this? Do you understand this? How can you understand anything about my kingdom if you don't get multiplication? And so my concern is that we'll just keep trying to add. For example, the pressure's off of me. Everywhere I go, I look for good soil. That's all I do. I'm just looking for good soil. And if I'm good soil, it's Tony at Beaver Toyota, where we're working on a disciple-making movement. It's Amanda and her girls at the ball field. It's me and Jeff in our CrossFit community. I'm telling you, the fields are widened to harvest, but the laborers are few. And if we'll just, again, get back to Jesus style disciple making and living, there's a world that's going to be unlocked before us, and we're going to win this day. So those are the just quick things. I'm sorry, Todd, to dominate there, but I wanted to get those out. You add to it, please. Roadblocks.
I think I would just, for mine, yours are really good. I'll stick to this simple thing. And I'm going to comment through the lens of programmatic reproduction. Like what are the roadblocks even to that? I think if we would just embrace the concept of first fruits, whether you want to put it tithing or whatever, what does it look like to give the first 10% of our time, talent, our treasure to the reproductive activities of the church, even if they're programmatic? I like to tell people all the time, people will come to me and say, what do I got to do to be a reproducing church? And I say, make the decision today to start tithing off your church's income to church planning. And we teach it to our people. We get up and tell people you need to tithe. I think our first barrier to what we're talking about here is our lack of willingness to engage our first fruits in the reproductive activities of the church.
Yep.
And that ought to penetrate all the decision making from the programs on down.
Todd,
Would it be true, Todd, that starts at the top as a leader as well?
It absolutely
I do hear a lot of questions like, how do we do this? And how do we even in the thing, how do we move from theory to practice? And most of the time we want the head knowledge of how to do it. But from what I've seen you guys and hearing you guys say, you got to do it. And then that's the first step.
Yeah. If I'm purely talking on the church planting side, and I somehow was a church planting czar, my rule would be, don't talk about wanting to plant a church until you have 3 generations of disciples you've made. Be a disciple maker and let the church emerge out of that. Why do we want to go make somebody a church planter before they've ever gotten to their 2nd generation of disciple making? And I'm not downplaying the work they do. Let them be a missionary into a mission field to get their 3+ generations of disciple making. And then let's talk about what the church looks like in that setting.
And Todd, the amazing thing is, if you really go after that, you're going to be surprised who's going to become your church planter.
That's exactly right.
You might find the best people multiplying don't have a seminary degree or a history in church leadership.
I think I'd take out the word "you might." If we took that approach in our churches, it's not a might. The latent capacity that's already in the churches, the very best church planters will never be mobilized in the current operating system of our church programmatically. We have to change our viewpoint. And I'm just suggesting this idea of first fruits is the barrier. If we would turn our thinking on the first fruits to, wait a minute, it's painful. I want to release the first 10% of our people to what we're talking about, not to get them serving in nursery or doing the check-in at the door, I want to find and mobilize the first 10% in the unique sweet spot of their calling and gifting to make disciples in their context, not in the posture of, I can do it, you can help me do my programmatic thing.
So I mean, listen, we've proven that this is 3 to 4 webinars. We're kind of at the end of our promised hour right now. And And there's so much more depth to be plumbed in this. Let me just close it with this one quick question. What for each of you is your one sentence prayer for the future of reproducing churches? If you could say, hey, this is my one sentence prayer for the future of reproducing churches, use this as kind of a closing, what would it be? Todd, go first.
You're going to think we're broken records, but my one sentence, my prayer is to see disciple making become the core engine and mission of the church.
Yeah, and for me, it's the same prayer. The way I apply it is everywhere I go, every day, every country, every state, every city is, God, give me one. Give me one person who will get this. So my prayer today is that one person on this webinar would say, I want to be that guy. I want to multiply 100 times through disciple making. And with that, we can change the world.
I love it. I want to continue the conversation. I know, David, we put your email up in the website. We've got the Multipliers Journey collab that Todd, you brought up. Multipliers operating system. That's a great way to connect through that is through David. You guys can reach out to him, davidp@auxano.com. You can also go to the Auxano website and see some of the Multipliers Journey collab pieces there. When's the next group starting up, David?
It'd be September-ish. I'll have to go back and look.
Okay.
But
so you're going to have a limited number of churches that'll get in on this Multipliers Journey collab in September.
yeah, so typically we'll have about 8 to 10 churches that will bring 3 to 5 team members with them, and we'll begin a collaborative process of developing a multiplication plan and putting it into practice. Love
it. Well, thanks for the conversation today, gentlemen. I love your hearts, and love getting to co-labor in this work with you. And I'm excited as you guys are leading forward in this, and look forward to seeing how the Lord's going to use it.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
God bless you guys.